gallery, thank you very much for coming out and to our talk from our wonderful artists, Ben and Anna. We're happy to have you here, and we're very happy to have this beautiful artwork all over our gallery. After the talk, feel free to stay and see more of the artwork. We're gonna try to get the chairs on the side as fast as we can. And there's so there's more of Anne's work here in the hallway upstairs. And there's also several studios that you can visit with from the residence artists here. So without further ado, let's give the floor to us.
I'm a bit impressed. English is not my native tongue. And I'm not used to that kind of an audience. So you will excuse my English when it's not very straight. And if you have questions, then you ask me. So this is my name. Anne is a French first name, very, very much from Brittany, where about 1/3 of the girls my generation were called Anne. Another third was called Marie, or Anne-Marie, or Marie-Anne, whatever you want. And then the rest, the 40% for all the other Breton names. They're different, not exactly French. So, Bellas is my husband's name, and he's Greek, so it's a Greek name. It's a good mixture. So, I'll first talk about my work. Of course, it's not 2027, it's 2017. Excuse my typing. And then I'll show you a couple of international artists that do something like that. So that's my tiny studio. I live in Nantes, which is a city in Brittany, and it's about 700,000 inhabitants. So it's a big city, but not that big that you cannot walk. I can cross on foot about in 30 minutes, and I don't need a car. I go everywhere on foot. So there is a cathedral, very important, the biggest monument in town. There's also a castle, which was built for Anne de Bretagne, who was the queen in the 1500s, more or less, when Brittany was independent and not part of France. There was the Queen of France and there was the Queen of Brittany. So, at some point, he had an eye on it and got her to marry him, kind of forced her to marry him. And then, of course, when she died, that was the dowry, so it stayed to the French kingdom, part of the French kingdom. And it's been 500 years, and believe me, the people are still hold a grudge. They do. So, I live in an apartment on the 4th floor, and it's a very tiny room. Our spaces are not yours. So my tiny studio is 2 yards by 4 yards, which makes about 80 square feet, if my count is right. And as you can see, well, the table here, the cutting table that the quilter needs, is on wheels that my husband made, so that I can access the fabrics. I have to take the table away, and of course then no one can pass. It's either, but I'm happy because it's my room. I can drop pins, and nobody is going to cry out. So it was not the case a couple of years ago. So about 2 or 3 times a year, I have a dyeing week. I have a sink that's about that big. It's very small, but I can still dye. So you can see, I put all these yogurt or whatever containers on the cutting table, and I make all the colors I need, and then It's about a week because I re-dye, I have to dry, to wash, to rinse, etc. It's quite a big work. But the end of the work is the pile here, and it's delicious to see fabrics and beautiful colors that you could even eat for breakfast. I use my great-grandmother's cottons, linens. She married in 1891, so she had a pile of sheets and tablecloth, and that's what I inherited. Because my sisters took the furniture, my apartment is much too small, I couldn't do anything with the furniture, so I said, textiles is for Annie. And they thought I was stupid, but because of course the value is totally disproportionate. But for me it's important. So as you can see, some of them are very old, have holes, because they've been washed so many times. 4 generations of women washed that. And at the start, like in the, well, when I was born, when I was a kid, we still went to the, what would you call it, the town public wash. You know, there were these, all the women would be there and they would beat the wash, etc. And I remember doing this with my grandmother, not my great-grandmother, but my grandmother. So they're all embroidered, all the sheets, and it's pretty interesting for a dyer and a quilter because you can dye and then quilt it, use it. That was the result of something I did here in Columbus 4 years ago in a class during the master class at QSDS, CCAD, and so that was a class with one of the tutors, and I learned to print, and what is it called? Not frame print, screen print. So that was my start, 2017. But you can see right away colors. It was my element. I would have eaten for breakfast. So in 18, well, already you see one of them is behind you here. The other doesn't exist anymore. It's somebody has it in their homes. In 2019, I started thinking about series and not only one piece at a time. So I started with this one, colored. I liked it very much. I thought, what if I forced myself to do it in black and white? What kind of different atmosphere it would give? And that's what I did. But at about 3/4 of the way, I thought I was going to die. So I had to add a bit of red and green to save my soul. And so they are here. I brought them. So you can have a look after this. This was 2019, and well, my technique was starting to get a bit better. And then the following work, year in 2020, I got my first piece jewelry in an American selection, and that was, oh, was I honored to get that. All the pieces, practically 95% of these pieces were self-dyed, and it was the first time I had used my self-dyed fabric, so it meant a lot to me. On my great-grandmother's sheets. That was the start of the COVID, well, lockdown. We were locked down, right? Mm-hmm. We were locked down exactly like you, except perhaps much stricter. We were not allowed to go out. We were not allowed to go out at all, and we had permission to go for food like once a day, and we had to have a permit on our telephone. We had to fill in what time we were going in and what time we were coming back. And it was not possible to go more than, I think, 1 mile from home. Wow. So those who had dogs were allowed to walk the dog, but with permit on the cell phone, with times, etc. So it was really very strict. And if you didn't abide, you would get $100 fine. So, and they gave several. One of my sons go. So this was at about that time, the same time, and so you will notice that the windows are starting to appear in many of my quilts because, and I didn't notice it at first. It was not that I willed it. It's just that suddenly I realized I was making lots of windows and looked out. When you're locked down in an apartment, you can't go out, but you can just open the window. Well, the window seems to be something very essential in your life. And so this is it. And since in Brittany there's a lot of ocean and it's across the Atlantic from you, well, not from Ohio, but from, let's say, Boston. So blues are, the blue color is very present because it's the sea and the ocean. Of course, when you lock down, you dream of going to the ocean. Same time, same window. So that's when it started. I was called to participate for books about quilting, for example. Suddenly, the editor, I don't know why, or the publisher, decided we were like 40 lockdown quilts artists, about 40. And I don't know why, the publisher said, I want this one on the cover. Oh. And I asked why. European colors. It's like more lively or something like that, more bright, perhaps brighter. So, first exhibit, flyer, you have this piece, Harmony was on the flyer, it's here, and my series Cathedrals started, and that's when you see two of them. The cathedrals, I just had a show in March in Nantes, where I live. First time there's a textile show. Textile is not very much praised in France. It's not a tradition, except, well, we have embroidery schools, we have lace schools, we have fashion, of course, so textile for fashion, yes. But art quilting, unheard of, what is that? What do you do? So I made, and you can see that perhaps Nikki will put it after the talk, I made a video about 12 minutes explaining my city, Nantes, and how I went from the stone cathedral to the textile cathedral, and I made 14 of them. So they're big, they're about like that, and they were shown, and so these are two of them here. First series, so window views, you have several of them. I have 30, or I had 30 pieces of those. So they're not very big, and they were meant windows, and meant to show what a person looking through, every person is different. So they see different. They see different colors. If they were just divorced, they certainly don't see that. If they are a bit dreamy, a bit, forgetting things, perhaps they go to the third one. If they are very kind of conservative or elegant and bien comme il faut, they would probably go to the second. And that was my picture. How do I represent people's differences from a window view? I had a lot of fun doing that. There are several, I don't know, but at least 5, 6, 7. Yeah, here. That was the next series, and you also have several, I think, in the kitchen here, several of them. Again, window views. But here, there's something special about it. We made a book because my sister wrote stories about, I asked her if she could write stories about each of them. So looking at the visual, she imagined someone, the narrator, explaining or saying what he or she thinks or what it reminds him. And so all these stories are here. And I made sure that it was in English so that my American public would follow, because of course she wrote in French. So if you're interested, there are books here. Well, these are the two, and that's when I was asked to participate in an international quilting group called 20 Perspectives. So we're 20 people, 20 women, and from Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, Hungary, well, Germany, all sorts of people. Africa is not represented, but, and so we have challenges 3 times a year, and that was part of it. That was, again, 20 perspectives, and the topic was portals and windows. Fit me exactly. So all the girls just made one that meant portals and windows, and if you go on the internet and look them up, because there's a website, you will see they're so different. We are different cultures, different colors, different shapes, different concepts of what a portal is. For example, for me, a portal would be cathedral, so I know what a portal would be. But I think for an American or a Canadian, it's probably very different. And that's the fun of it. So in neighborhoods, we're getting already in 2022, you have several here also I showed. And same thing, for me it was like, if you're on a street, and there is a kind of unity in the architecture. At least in Europe it is like this. So you have the same kind of stone, the same kind of roof, the same kind of height, the same kind of windows or balcony. If you move from another to another city, they're different. Different stone, different roofs, different materials. But on the same street, you have very different people who live together. Neighbors hate each other, love each other, are indifferent to each other, and that's what I wanted to represent. So, Cathedral series, that one was selected for a show here in the States, and I wanted to show you a little bit, if I may. That's for you to understand how I start like this. I have an idea of a portal of windows, then I try to find something like the ground. Would you say the ground? The base?
Ground, yeah.
The what?
Like the ground plane, the background.
The background, yes, the background. Tried, didn't please me. Tried differently, didn't work. Tried the complementary color, didn't work. Tried blue, okay, could go. Then I worked on the portal because this one I didn't like, this one I didn't like, this one I didn't like. So it's like you take several weeks. This one was about 150 hours of work, and I'm not counting, it's big like this, for feet? 4 feet. 4 feet by 3 feet. And I'm not counting the dyeing process, which of course is time too. But to get to the result, that was 150 hours, so just imagine how much it means. Had a lot of fun doing that. I'm not complaining. Can you see here? And then I changed. I went for a new series, and it was kind of optioned by the gallery, a gallery in Rehoboth, Delaware last October. They said, well, no, we're not interested in cathedrals, but we would be interested in oceans. And so I kind of started work, and I worked all winter and all the spring to get these. And so these are all, well, these are about like this, and the big ones are like the cathedrals. There are two formats that I like particularly. I have, you can see many different formats, but the big ones, I cannot go over 4 feet, 3 feet, because my tiny space. How would I, some quilters, very good quilters, international, they go like 2.5 meters, so that would be what? 2.5 meters would be like 8 feet by 8 feet. How could I, 8 feet, I don't even have that. So, different perspectives of water, and that's drawing, very, that was called the Aral Sea. You know what that is? So, it's nearly disappeared, there's nearly no water anymore. And so I have several different color perspectives and different. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of international artists. Many are Americans. You will see the majority are American, because you have a tradition of patchwork and then quilting and art quilting. Here, the art quilters started, like I would say, late 80s to go really modern. So something like 80s, 90s, now in full pull. In France, they're still into patchwork, by hand, machine. So, because it's not our tradition, so we're not evolving very quickly, so to speak. So, of course, I'm showing you the ones that influence me or that I particularly like, and you will see the common, what would you think the common denominator is? Color. You got it right. So Pat Polly, with whom I learned the screen printing. Katie is right now giving a class, and 2 of us here are attending her class. Lisa Call, it's not because of her colors, but because her design is very good, very interesting. Probably design. Rosalie Days, we had her here in several years at CCAD. She gave classes, and she's an incredible woman. Argentina. I like the contrast, colors, black and gray. Here too, values, and suddenly this red spot, I find it breathtaking. All this is textile, even thin lines. So 150 hours is not only me, I'm sure they also do that. Something else. So Phyllis is part of 20 Perspectives, our 20-member group, and she specializes in portraits. So she makes all sorts of portraits with very bright colors. That's her. She's incredible. She wrote a book too, and I'm very, I find it awesome, but I don't go to portraits. Anne Brower, I like her very much because she has these both line and color in very simplified designs. That's Australia. Well, that's a bit too representative for me, too figurative for me, but she is very skilled. I met her not very long ago. Sue Benner gave classes practically not every year, but every other year here at USDS. Now, I want the last pictures, the last slides I want to show you. So there are two worlds which are very, very good at art quilting. It's the United States and the Anglo-Saxon world as a whole, and Japan. They are really the two best groups. Now, you see in Japan, the Museum of Quilt Art, and if you go on the internet, you will see those incredible pictures about that museum that's beautiful, spacey. I mean, you would like to have a bed there and sleep there. Then you have Nebraska. You wouldn't think, you would think New York, California. No, in Nebraska you have the International Quilt Museum, and it's beautiful too. Just look it up on the internet. Absolutely big, huge. They have a collection of I don't know how many thousands of quilts. Quilt National Museum, Paducah, Kentucky. Yes, but they have such collections like nobody else has. So, huge building again. And my last picture, no, not quite. Visions Museum is in California, and they also have an incredible collection of art quilts. Last year, I got this one in, and you will see it upstairs. You go the staircase up, and you will see it. It got an award there. In France, Musée du textile et de la mode, fashion. Musée du tissu et des arts décoratifs, crafts. No museum for art quilting, or for quilt, or for patchwork. Zero. So that's why I'm so happy to have been welcome here. Nikki, where are you? She's not here. Anyway, you'll welcome. I am so honored that, well, she saw a couple of my pieces last year, and she was very enthusiastic and said, I want to invite you for next year. You have to bring all those pieces. People should see them. And that's a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to show this here, because in France, well, my cathedrals were here, but it's starting, I don't think it will be in my lifetime that it really takes up. It will take another generation. So, if you have any questions, here you will have two videos, the one I talked about Nantes and the Cathedral series, and you will have a 7-minute one which explains, yes, I speak in French in that short one, but all the subtitles are in English, and it explains all the processes from dyeing to quilt finished. For those who are not quilters, I'm sure Deb will not need that, and Jane will not need that, and Nancy will not need that because they know it. But some of you perhaps don't know what the processes are and will enjoy watching this. So, any questions? I thank you all.
So, hi, I'm Ben Sostrom, and I'm a wood sculptor, and I'm really excited to be here exhibiting with Anne, and it's been just absolutely fantastic. A little bit about me. I grew up in the Columbus area, working with my grandfather in his garage shop periodically. A couple of years ago, actually, after he passed, or right before he passed away, I went down to see him with my father, and I hadn't seen him in a while. And he was asking about my work, and he's like, how did you learn to do it? I'm like, well, I started doing it with you, and he's like, you didn't, I wasn't a woodworker, theater. Your dad is, and he learned from my dad, but I didn't really learn much. I'm like, no, you did. You were the one who was around, and we would do all of my Pinewood Derby cars together, and fix chairs together, and putter about. But I started with him there, and then I ended up going in a completely different direction, and graduated from OSU in astrophysics and theater. So don't really go together. I did work in astrophysics for a number of years in high school and college, and definitely don't work in it now. I'm a manager of a hardware store, and Mutual Ace Hardware, if anyone's been here. But I did spend, I've spent about 20 years of my career in the theater and film, and as an actor and as a props designer. So I started props designing back in 2002 now. 2004 really was when it really started in the end of high school, and ended up continuing doing that for many years. And this is a few images from some of the shows I've been in, and I picked that center one just because that's from the Columbus Neighborhoods documentary of Worthington. And so my husband Jeff, who's in the corner with the camera, who's also an actor, and I played two of the founders of Worthington, and there was a deleted scene where I gave a very drunken speech, and it's a very colorful history. But I've did props design work for about 20 years with a number of theater companies in the region, including with CACA, where we met. And most recently with CCT's production of Newsies. That's a 15-foot long fake working printing press I had to design and build, and that was it was not the best experience, but it got done. So I got back into woodworking through props. When you're, as a props designer, when you're working with things that are going to be invariably handled by actors who are in actor brain and are very focused on what they are doing and are very likely to break something or many things. You work with a lot of differing materials, and you find a lot of very creative ways to quickly bodge them back together, and a lot of which ends up being wood, and I sort of fell back in love with the medium through that. And so by 2014, I had started doing small pieces again and getting back into it. And then by the time I was stepping back initially from doing as much theater work, around 2016, I started doing more and more first furniture design work, and then more into abstracts and sculpture work. Initially through the idea of, in order to justify it to myself, I started calling it spiritual furniture. So furniture that doesn't have a physical purpose, but it's useful to me in other ways. And so for 5 years, I was a member of Studios on High Gallery in the Short North with Michael Hickman, remain here, and it was a very formative, amazing experience. And I did 3 solo shows there, Being on Being in 2019, which was a show built around pieces that were designed to evoke both Buddhist folklore and also personal stories and memories, and explore my own process of faith and faith development, and act as meditative pieces. And then These Are Not for You in 2021, which was after a year of working for Mutual Hardware during COVID and its busiest period in its now 80-year history, and being very, very done with people altogether, and wanting to do something that didn't involve human beings. So they were a series of pieces designed for use both indoors and outdoors, for use by and then collaboration with alteration by different types of animal species. And so Kinetic Salt Licks, like Meta down below, was on a giant bronze bear, and actually you can see it. It is along. If you drive back along the Adena Brook Ravine, it's along one of the roads back there. And Thicket, which is the one on the top, was a piece about that big that is a designed as a bird refuge, so it's got an open feeder at the base, and then a series of ipe stems with small ash leaves that the birds can fly in on, land in, hide out in, and as they move about in it, the ipe staves vibrate, and there are small bells hidden inside all of the turned fruits on each of those, and they sort of ring softly, and the birds end up creating their own music. So there's a whole series of pieces built around that. And then finally in last year, I did my first full installation work warehouse, which was a reflection on the good and the not so good of my 20 years in props, and as I was retiring from it, and it was. It's been just an amazing experience, and I left the gallery shortly after that. It was time, and doing sculpture work while also maintaining a day job is an interesting balance. But I was looking also to branch out and do additional shows, because when you're in one gallery and you're building pieces for a single gallery, it can be difficult to reach out and collaborate with our other artists outside, and find the time. So cut to a few months ago, I was in the process of fulfilling a GCAC supply grant that I got last fall to upgrade my shop. We had, and this is some of my examples of my different examples of my sculptural work and the things that I like to work in. I use wood and paper, so wood and then primarily washi paper. So a lot of steam bending and traditional techniques, hand tool work, coupled with more modern techniques as well. So laser cutting and CNC work sometimes features in my work, and turning, and sort of all woven together into the same pieces. And I like to explore strange abstracted forms, natural forms, and tie it into also my scientific background, and also a little bit of a sense of theater. I do like a good show. But in fulfilling this GCAC grant, we had moved during the pandemic from a very, very small apartment into a slightly larger space, and I was able to set up a basement shop where I didn't have to pile all of my tools on the laundry. Which was previously the case. But there were still things that were left undone, and I got the supply grant and was able to do a large scale upgrade on a couple of primary areas, mainly my ventilation, which woodworking is very dusty, and that dust is not very good for you, not to mention you get allergic to it over time. And then also I have a large, what they call a 14-inch bandsaw, which is kind of deceptive because it's like this tall and it will cut huge logs, but I was able to double its resaw capacity to expand it, which allowed me to start to work with some very large pieces of wood. I primarily work with fallen wood, with urban timber, trees that come down in our neighborhoods or have to be pruned for illness, and a lot of older wood as well, from woodworkers who have passed it along. I have wood from my Uncle Stace's collection. My great Uncle Stace, who was a woodworker, passed several years ago, and he had his daughter approached me and said, "You're the only other woodworker in the family," and on my mother's side, and they're tearing his entire house down in 3 days, with his entire shop in the basement, all of his wood, and it's been flooded. And would you come up to Valley City and take whatever you can before they tear the house down? And so I went up there, and we spent many, many hours together talking and cleaning and going through all of the moldy stuff, and gathering up what we could, old tools, a lot of wood. And so we piled into my husband's, at the time, Ford Focus, small as I could, and I drove like this all the way home from Valley City, and it was very forgiving. And so his wood also finds its way into my work quite a bit.
And so to be able to now use it, because previously there was no way for me to resaw a lot of this or work with it. I worked with it by hand when I was building that salt lick sculpture that involved a large log. And sometimes those get so big that when you're trying to manage the hand carving, I threw my back out twice. Which I work in hardware, so that's not a good thing. You gotta keep your back up from lifting concrete and soil and things. So this upgrade made a lot of things possible. But I was in the middle of this upgrade, and Nikki, who's hiding in the hallway right now, who was coordinating the shows here, approached me and said, "I've seen your work. I saw it at the gallery. I would like to see if you'd be willing to do a show with us. And I have this show in mind. We have this textile artist, Annabelle, who's coming from France, and I think your work would work well together." And I was very trepidatious. I'd done a show just a year before, and I was kind of burnt out. I had, stepped away from props, and I was dealing with these upgrades, and my husband, who's a teacher, is dealing with getting a theater program going at a new school, and I was like, I don't know, I really don't know. And she's like, well, just look at her work, and then get back to me. And I went to her site and I looked at her work, and I was immediately, okay, yes, I have to do this. This is amazing. This work is incredible, and I've got to do something in response to this, because the dimensionality of her work and the layering, the window views, the way that the windows, these layers build on each other, the depth to it felt very sculptural and very three-dimensional to me, and spoke to me and my work a great deal. So Nikki said, you can bring some of your existing pieces if you'd like, and I was like, I think I'm gonna make some new work. So I ended up with a dozen pieces in here, seven of which are existing work from 2018 to 2020 that really felt like it was responding to her work sort of in advance. And then 5 new pieces that I made specifically in the last few months with the GCAC supply grant upgrades for this show. And there's a couple more shots. So in making those pieces for the show, the thing that got a little hairy was I had just put in the upgrades in the shop, and I immediately was using them to their maximum. So that's a shot of me resawing a 12-inch cubical block of white oak, which, if any of you know, white oak is an extremely dense wood. It's very squirrely. It can do very funny things in saws and burn a lot, and so I burned through drive belts, and tires exploded, and nearly shot 1 or 2 things at me, but it worked. And so now I feel like, okay, I've tested the system to its limit, and now we know what it can do. So this has been great as a dry run as well of the system, but. The new work I had done for the show, I did 5 pieces, and in looking at her work, what immediately became apparent to me was in dealing with these window views, these looking into other spaces, other senses, other places, as windows in different countries, neighbors juxtaposed next to each other. That when I am working with wood is sort of a window through not space but time. You've got a layer of rings, and as you carve down through, you're literally carving through time. Most of the time you're moving through more years than you've been alive by a significant number. A lot of the trees, that oak tree for instance, was probably well over 200 years old. We don't know exactly how much. That was a piece of wood from a friend's father. They had to take that oak tree down because it had been killed by termites, and it was extremely large, but they had to chunk it down for safety. But it had been alive for a much, much longer time than I had been on Earth. And so when you're working with wood, you become very quickly conscious of the fact that you're working with a very ancient being that is also, you're handling a corpse, effectively. And sometimes that's very literal, in that sometimes you're dealing with strange smells, or you're contacting strange types of deterioration in the material, but it also sort of ties you back to your own mortality and to your own you have the larger experience of time on this planet. And so in thinking about this, I wanted to make each piece evocative of a different type of window in space or time in a long time scale. And so these are a couple of some of the initial processing. So I sketch my work pretty heavily when I'm developing it. With wood, you can never predict what it's going to do. You never know what you're going to find inside the log. And in some cases, with a few of these, there were some very big surprises. One of which almost went very wrong on the bandsaw. You can never predict what it's going to do. The internal
The
stresses.
textile's just the same. You
Yeah.
can never predict what's coming out.
Yeah, and the wood might it might move on you. There's internal stresses because you're dealing with an organism that was initially huge that you've been cutting down, that's been holding up, hundreds, thousands of pounds of weight for years and years at a time. And so there's all of this internal stress baked in the material. So when you cut it, that stress wants to open up, it wants to relieve, and it can do that explosively sometimes. The wood will blow apart, or it'll suddenly twist, or it'll close up on your saw blade as you're cutting, so you have to wedge it open as you progress so that or clear your cuts so that you don't get a catastrophic kickback. And so you have to work with the wood. You can't really tell it what to do. So I'll develop my sketches initially of my pieces and what I think I might want it to do and how I might want it to happen. But as I do each successive process on that wood, I'll have to go back to the drawing board and revise it and change it because it's going to fundamentally change what I can do with it, what the wood wants to do, because it makes the ultimate choices in that process. So of the pieces that I did, there we go. So the first one I did for this show was a piece called Rip Current. I'm still thinking about that process of looking into another space, another time in this world that's unfamiliar in terms of timescales and in terms of how I live my life. And what came to mind was a memory. I was in my late teens, and my grandparents, my mother's parents, lived down in St. Pete in Florida, in St. Petersburg. And there's a beach down there called Paso Grill Beach, and we used to go all the time. When I was a kid, I'd go down all the time, usually 3 or 4 times a year. Flights were really cheap back then, and swim and crawl around on the beach and find strange things. But we were down there that one last time because my grandmother had passed away, and we were down for the memorial service. And my cousins, who were in their late 20s and should have known better, decided to goad me into swimming a quarter of a mile out to a sandbar that they were like, oh, you can reach it, you can stand on it, it'll be great. We're gonna go out to this sandbar. So we get out to the sandbar, and we're kind of exhausted, and the tide is high, and you can't reach the sandbar. And so you can sort of almost touch it with your toe, like with the water up to like here. So then a rip current comes in. So we start trying to swim back, but we're dumb and we don't realize you're supposed to swim around a rip current and not directly into a rip current. And so obviously it just keeps sweeping us back out. And you can't help but look down into the water because the waves are coming very high. And I look down a couple of times, and the sandbar is there, and it's completely covered in sand dollars. Just hundreds, thousands of them just all over the place. They do not care. This is their home, it's placid down there. That is where they live their entire life. And I remember thinking, that is so strange that I am drowning here and they do not know and they do not care, and they're living a totally independent life of me that's nevertheless connected to me, but that I would never have otherwise known about unless I were doing this really stupid, horrible thing right now. And some through the rip current, and we're completely exhausted, don't recommend ever doing that. But it stuck with me very strongly. Idea that there are so many beautiful, strange living beings on this planet that live so differently from us and yet are connected to us directly, even though we don't realize it 95% of the time, we just don't notice. And so in this piece, I was thinking about the water being that window, that it allowed me to see something that I had never really paid attention to, going all of those years going down to Florida. You know, I'd find the shells on the beach and it was really fascinating, but I wouldn't really think about it. And so in this piece, it is a block, almost a complete log of hard maple. And it was initially a test to see how this resawing would work. So it's not actually cut all the way through. All of the other pieces are fully cut through, stacked in layers. And this one, it's a partial cut through that creates this levitating wave with a black locust inset for the sand on the bottom. And there's a beach figure carved in that is suspended in the wave by its head and is just almost able to touch the sandbar, but not quite. And then in the sandbar, there were tiny sand dollars set in that have been the only laser cut component on the piece that were cut out of the same maple as in the rest of the log. So this combines a number of processes. There's a lot of hand carving and gouging work involved, and the figure is carved with tiny 1/8" gouges and chisels, actually from my Uncle Stace's Mobley basement. And then power carving in the wave work, gilding on the waves. So the waves all have a gilding, a silver gilding in aluminum just on the top of the crest, and the bottom is flattened underneath the wave surface so that it's much more reflective and is gilded in as well. And that piece is actually right behind you there. But it got me thinking about, okay, so this is sort of my personal initial experience with windows on another time, on another space, and how can I explore that in a larger way? And it also showed that the bandsaw wasn't going to explode. So moved on to this next piece here, Sandstone Cleft. And this is a piece of black locust, which is a wood that is native to the region. It's got a beautiful white blossom that cascades down and smells like jasmine or orange blossoms. And it grows as effectively a weed tree. It grows in early. It's a colonizer tree that will come in initially and sort of lay the way for a larger forest to come in. And when my husband and I, during the pandemic, were in that tiny little apartment, we faced onto Walhall Ravine, and there were black locust trees all along the back that grow up the ravine, and the birds would spend all of their time in there, and they kept me company a lot when I get off the hardware store and pass out and wake up and go out and sit on the back porch. And so in thinking about those places, those different spaces that we don't necessarily see initially, I started thinking about it through sort of geography, and another moment in my childhood sort of came to me. I have always been sort of obsessed with caves and clefts and gorges. When I was a kid, I don't know if any of you have been to Camp Odioka in the Hocking Hills, but there is a place called Split Rock. It's this gigantic sandstone slab. It's about the size of a football field that has cracked in tons of different maze-like structures and split over time. And so you walk out onto the top of it, you can climb down into it and explore through, and it's this as a child, it's like the craziest playground you will ever go on, probably the most dangerous, but it is incredible. And so ever since then, I've been sort of obsessed with cracks and crevices and canyons. And so the black locust, being as canary yellow as it is, when you cut black locust, it comes out, it's almost neon yellow. It's in the pea family, and some of those woods do very strange things. And so when you cut it, it's very bright yellow, and it turns to sort of this caramel color, and it looks like sandstone. And so I cut into each layer a different portion of the cleft to create an image in forced perspective, a cavern in forced perspective, which means that, you know, everything shrinks as you get further back, so it makes it look deeper than it is. And then there's a walk floor to the cleft that is constructed like a key. So each layer interlocks into the single piece. You have to slide it through in a particular sequence and lock it in, and it holds all of the layers together. And then there's a rosewood tenon along the bottom that then locks all of it into place. And at the back, because when I was a kid, there's another one at Hocking Hills called Fat Man Squeeze, and you go down this. It probably man-made step at some point carved into the rock. And when I was a child, my first time there, I started to walk down and I got very freaked out. And I came running back up. And then I'm like, all right, now I'm gonna try, because all of our church was there for a Labor Day retreat. And so everybody's like kind of in a line going through this thing. And I'm gonna try. And so I go down a little bit further and I come back up. And then I go down a little bit further and I come back up, and I finally ended up going through, and you have to climb through this small crevice on your belly, and you finally get through the far end of this. It's just sort of a pinprick of light initially when you're down there in the darkness, and then you get through the end of it. And so in the back of the sculpture there is a tiny brass tube with an acrylic lens built into it, and it acts as a light pipe. And so if you get the light just at the right angle, you'll see this small light cast through the back of the sculpture from behind a turn in the last layer through, and you'll see just a little bit of light coming through from the other side. So this third piece here, Time Capsule, was made from a tree that's actually still alive. Actually in Clintonville on California Avenue, that was a pin oak, and pin oaks are a soft oak. They're a red oak species, so they can sometimes have rot problems. And all oaks tend to get an infection with a bacteria called Dendrosporobacter quercicollis. And it's what gives oak its really distinctly oaky smell. It's almost like this faintly cheesy smell. It's from this bacteria, because it's normally in most all oaks, and it just lives there. And most of the time it's no problem. But if the tree starts to get sick, if it gets attacked by gall wasps, or something else occurs, a carpenter ant infestation, that bacteria can start to take over. And so for this tree to survive, they had to amputate part of it off and cut it up. And that wood turned a very deep caramel color from that infection, which is really unique and unusual for pin oak. But the other thing it does is when the wood is still wet, when it's green, it makes it smell like death. It smells very strongly like that. It's kind of overwhelming. And that was one of those experiences when you're working with it initially, and you're just grossed out and horrified, but also you realize that you're in sort of you're handling something that's very sacred. You're handling, a part of another living being that is this part is no longer with us, and you've got to make what you do with it worthwhile, because what that part would normally be doing, what that being would normally be doing in its death, is providing an ecosystem for all of the other animals and insects and countless other beings that live in it, and also for its own offspring. So the pin oaks produce these beautiful striated acorns that, when the tree dies, will carry it on, and often will grow up in the matter, what's left when it breaks down. And so in thinking about that, I realized that as I was cutting into this, I'm seeing into the past, I'm seeing into its life as a tree, but I'm also seeing into its potential future as a rebirth for its own offspring. And so I turned a small representation of a pin oak acorn and gilded it in the center. And each disc, this is the only piece where I cut it what they call crosscut or cookie style. So I made what woodworkers refer to as cookies, which is when and you cut a tree off in perpendicular to the grain. And it's usually really precarious because there's a lot of, as the wood shrinks and contracts, you get differential drying. So the inside might dry at a different rate than the outside, and there's a different amount that it can move relative to the outside. And so it starts to pull away and it can crack or check and split and do very strange things, which made the cross-cutting of that really precarious. My jig was not really built for that, but I cut it in progressively thinner layers down to 3/16 of an inch, and then each layer I took a large 18-inch fret saw and cut out along the grain, along the actual ring of the wood, so I followed the ring so that it expands out and it creates a space inside, like a capsule, like a hidden spot in the wood, like a gall. Oaks frequently, when they get an infection, will encase that infection and basically create a cocoon inside of themselves around it. You see those big weird knots coming out of the tops of trees sometimes, or the sides. That's what that is. The tree trying to protect itself. And then the outer layer is delaminated, so I carefully peeled all of the bark off to reveal the texture of the cambium just below it. But all of it's been gilded in copper on the inside. That's sort of a common running theme in these 5 pieces was the gilding, the use of gilding and dyeing techniques in it, to sort of give an idea that there is something really precious inside of this. The future of this tree is very precious, is the most precious thing that it has. And then this piece behind me is celestial epochs. So I worked in astrophysics for a number of years. It was my high school job, that was my college job at OSU Astronomy Department, and did research, was a TA, and I loved the field very much. I did not love the idea of sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours a day. Otherwise you're in teaching, and anymore most of the observation work is done with satellites and with ground-based telescopes, and there's just not a lot of observational work to do anymore. So I realized that the field was really not for me, and after 7 years in school I was not prepared to do a doctorate. But I carry that with me in my work where I can, because it's the scope of it, the understanding of the scope of the universe and the vastness of it, and how insignificant we are, and yet how vitally part of it we are, and how we don't really notice that in our daily lives is a really important source of meaning for me. And so in this piece, when I was in college, high school and college, one of the big research projects I worked on was dealing with recalibrating the life of a star. So we are still trying to understand, in some ways, how stars evolve, how stars live and die, and what the timescales are. And so we were using a lot of standard candles. It's something that you know the distance, you know the brightness, and you can therefore gauge what stage of its life is in to recalibrate and try and get a more accurate idea of how stars live and die. But they live and die in phases. They start out their lives in nebula, and they're born, and they become a main sequence star like our star, and they medium-sized, burning just fine, and and steady, and slowly burning their fuel down, and then they burn down all of their hydrogen, and they start to swell, and they're burning heavier elements, and they grow very bright and very big, and they eat a lot of their planets, and they become a giant. And then when they burn all of that heavy stuff up to iron, and they can no longer hold themselves up anymore because they've got all these heavy elements and it's pulling it down, they start to collapse, and they become white dwarfs, or if they collapse further and they're held up by something called neutron degeneracy pressure, they become neutron stars, and if they collapse even further and they're big enough, they become black holes. And so this piece of wood was a huge piece of soft maple that had been infested with a beetle called ambrosia beetle, and it makes what's called ambrosia maple. So it infects it with a fungus, and you get this black and blue streaking, and it reminded me a bit of space and nebulas. It turns the oak very dark, but additionally it was a crotch piece, which means it's where a branch emerged from the tree, and on the back side there is a crotch section where there was an enormous starburst in the wood. The ray checking that I talked about earlier, with where the wood starts to shrink back and crack, formed a starburst, and the whole thing started to look kind of like the surface of an old map, a star map, or an astrolabe, which is an old medieval star measuring, stellar distance measuring tool. And so I gilded it like an astrolabe, because they were often made out of brass, and then split the wood so that it would create successive layers, because as you look back further through space, you are looking through the biggest window there is, and each layer you look back, each level you look back further, you're also looking back deeper into time, because that light has taken longer to reach us. And so as we look further at a given star, or a star at a given distance, you're seeing it younger and younger and younger. And so each layer represents a different phase in the star's lifetime. So there's a subtle carved, gouged surface in the back that represents the sort of undulations of a nebula, and then there's a sphere that's ungilded in the second layer that you can just barely see here, because everything is torched inside to create the void of space. That's the main sequence, and then a gilded larger sphere for the giant phase, and then finally this black torched small dwarf neutron star. And normally when I'm trying to turn wood black, because it has become sort of a theme in some of my work, I ebonize it, and that's treating it with iron acetate. You take steel wool, you wash it off, you throw it in a bunch of vinegar for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, sometimes longer. I have a vat that's been, for years, it's been steeping. And then you wipe a wood that's rich in tannins, just like in tea. You wipe that onto the wood, and it'll react with the tannins and deposit this black iron, deposits directly into the wood, and it turns, woods like oak that have lots of tannins turn jet black just immediately. It's this crazy process over like 2 minutes. You wipe it on, and it starts to turn slightly dark, and then gray, and then suddenly just bam, it is super black. And with maple, it's not so tanniny. There's certainly not much there, and probably what little was there, the ambrosia beetle may have taken care of, and or the fungus. So there wasn't really an option. I could have wiped it down with tea and done some, but I was thinking about it and the way the star burns, and I thought the only way to really get that deep, deep black was to torch it. So I torched it, and then burnished it, and torched it again with a butane torch, and burnished it again, until it creates this velvety, dark expanse. It doesn't reflect much light. And then the back of each plank is gilded with that same copper, so that it bounces light in indirectly. And when you look at it from the front, and all of the seams, all the gaps disappear, because they're tapers that are forced perspective tapers that are set in front of each other, it creates this dim glow that you can't quite identify. And yeah, this was probably my favorite piece to do. It was also one of the scariest. The saw got very angry a couple of times. It broke two drive belts in the process, and bound up on the saw about 5 times, and almost took out a bearing. So it got a little hairy. There's about 300 gigabytes worth of footage that I trolled through to get all the photos for this, because my friend Liz, who's a video editor, was doing a promo for us and had me film a lot of the processes, and there's some scary moments with this one, and footage of it kicking back on me and doing strange things. And then I fret sawed all of the first surface through, and then the other ones, I took a jigsaw and the longest blade I could find and put it at an angle, and it just barely kissed the back of the surface, so it almost burnt the jigsaw out, but it ended up doing a surprisingly decent job. But it is, yeah, it's the hairiest piece that I had, and I kind of enjoy that. And then I finally made the piece Digging for the Seam. And that one's in the alcove in there. And that piece was made out of a 12 by 12 by 12 roughly block of that termite infested white oak that I mentioned. And that one came to me later from a coworker actually at the hardware store. He's an artist, he's a ceramicist, and his father is also an artist in the area, Don Slobodian, he's a painter. And he had recently obtained this. He's also a mushroom farmer. So his friend had given him a good deal of this termite oak to use for growing mushrooms because it's very great for that. But he thought, I wonder if he could do something with this. So I was looking at it. I tried resawing it, and it started to explode because the termites grow fungus in the wood. They create these huge veins of fungus, of this bright yellow fungus. That's their food source. So that's what they spend their whole lives doing. They'll burn themselves out doing it. And the wood fault lined at those fungus lines. I couldn't see them when I was working with it, and it just blew open. And I'd already been thinking about doing something involving a mountain with it because it felt like a mountain. It felt like this huge place, and oak being something that really ebonizes well with that iron acetate. I thought of the black and the deep black of the earth. But then when it split open, I realized that those termites that we normally sort of vilify, I deal with them a lot. Of the hardware store people come in, they're dealing with termite problems. They're trying to find ways to get them out of their house or out of their garden, or stop killing their arborvitaes or destroying their sill plate. They are miners. They're living their lives as miners. They're devoting their entire life to this craft and to working wood, but also to mining deep in this wood, never really seeing the sun much at all, to create this fungus that they live on, that they live in a symbiotic relationship with. That this fungus has evolved to live with termites and be cultivated by termites. And the gold of that fungus made me realize it's almost like a precious metal to them. It's something that sustains them, and that's more important to them than just about anything else. And so I split it open, and then where it exploded on the seam, I gilded it. I gilded all of the fungus, I gilded all of the individual termite holes, and then ebonized the interior surface of each layer, so it's like looking into the earth. And then there is a sort of minecart track that crosses through all of them, that's made out of stakes of ebonized oak that are stitched together with brass rod to sort of suggest, I guess this, we aren't all that different in how we live in many ways, even though, we also, don't want our houses to fall down. So the other 7 pieces I brought were from 2018 to 2020, which was a period where I was starting to explore my own faith in my work, and starting to explore the idea of meditative spaces. And because of that, because some of the pieces were pieces for shows that we used to do at the gallery called The Art of Gifting. We do them around Christmas, cheaper pieces for people to get as Christmas gifts. But all of them had to fit within a certain dimension, a 4x6, 4x4, or 6x6 frame to hang. And so I built the pieces with the frames as part of the sculpture, and this idea immediately became these feel like small meditative rooms. At the time we were living in a very small apartment, and it was like, okay, how do you get a space to yourself when you need to be quiet, when you need to be with yourself? What is the smallest that that space can be and can look like? And so a series of quiet rooms came out of it. And I did three series of quiet rooms, the first of which were 7 pieces that were filled with steam vent staves covered in laminated and washi paper as these floating sculptures. Each room, the back was cut out as a silhouette to echo the ecosystem that sculptural form lived in. So there were jellyfish and beehives and box elder maples, because they were also growing with the black locusts, and even us, and people, and sort of the chaos that we sometimes live in. This abstractive pattern in the back, and then they were laminated with washi on the back, so that when they're placed in front of a window or in a lit space, they illuminate themselves and glow. And then the second series I did were slightly larger, quiet rooms with native tree species. So there was I did 3 of them as a triptych, an Osage orange, white oak, and silver maple, which were all trees that I grew up with and used to climb and see everywhere in Columbus. You would see them frequently along the river, or if you drive through any of the neighborhoods in Clintonville. And then the third series was during the pandemic, and I was having a lot of trouble and was trying to come up with something to do for the gallery. All of us were having a great deal of difficulty, creating work that first year. My first piece back was a box this big called Stretching My Legs, because I just couldn't really make anything. I'd get home from work, we were all working double shifts trying to cover the hardware store because everybody was stuck at home working on their houses, and so we had the busiest numbers. We had lines to High Street of people standing there waiting to come in, and so I'd get home and I would just pass out and had no energy for anything. And so this was some of the first work I did after that. And they were a series of pieces where they were deep black inside, so they were ebonized on the outside, ebonized oak, and then on the inside a deep black dyeing process, and with washi paper spheres or bubbles in them, forming sort of these bubbles like we were living in at the time, interacting in strange ways with small windows opening up these circular spaces in acrylic in the walls, letting a little bit of light in here and there. And I did a few of those for that series. Then the other piece that felt like it spoke to these windows was a piece I did from 2019 called Transmigration. And it sort of led to the production of all of these pieces. All the processes that I use in these now were initially from that piece. My dad's parents, my grandparents, the woodworker, had just passed away, and I had just done that first show on Buddhist folklore and personal stories, and they passed away, and I was raised with them largely. My mom, they were the only other family here in Columbus. My mom was a single mom, so I lived over there on East Weber most of the time, and for many years. But then they moved away, and things had become strained and distant in other parts of the family, and so I hadn't seen them for a long time. And so when I saw them again a bit before they died, but when it came time to mourn them, it was harder to relate, to figure out how to access that, because I had been raised going to synagogue with them at Temple Israel, and had attended there for many years, but I hadn't been in years. I sort of left that part of my faith in my past, and so I wasn't sure how to mourn them. I couldn't do the Kaddish or Sit Shiva. I didn't know how to access that. And being Buddhist, I gravitate toward Soto Zen, and there's not as much mourning practice there. But there's a thing in Tibetan Buddhism. Many of you have heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and this idea of the bardo, or the world between death and rebirth, and world and time and space between worlds, and it's experienced also as a physical time for people on Earth. This idea of 39 days after a person dies, and you recite the bardo to them in order to help guide them to wherever they will go next. And so in thinking about that, I ended up reciting the bardo for them. Not for the full 39 days. That was quite difficult. But it came time to do a piece for a show shortly after that, and I was still very much in that headspace. And I just done that other show, and I thought I need to make one last piece to live as a companion piece to these other pieces, and to sort of to explore that and to also process that. And so this piece, Transmigration, is my interpretation of the bardo, I suppose. The front layer is red mulberry, and it's all been hand gouged with a fishtail gouge to create something like the surface of the water. There's a Buddhist idea of people and beings, everything that is, being like a wave on the water. So there's the ocean, and then there's the form of the wave of the ocean, and that wave goes for a time, and then it fades, right? They bounce off each other, and they cease to be, but they don't, because it's just a form, it's part of the ocean. And so I was thinking about the surface like the ocean, or even like an organic form, like a honeycomb. And so it spirals into the center, and then in the center there are a series of photographs I took of from the perspective of all sorts of different types of life forms. And they're inset inside behind a fisheye lens that stretches them off into infinity. It creates this sort of infinite sphere, and you look through it. And on the back there is a gilded plywood mirror, sculpted mirror, that bounces light in through the side and back through the back and illuminates them. And so it was the first piece I did with ebonizing. The back is made of white oak, and it's all jet black ebonized. And the first gilding that I did with pieces, but also it was thinking about those windows, it was really kind of the first time I really tried to access that view. And so I realized late in the game that needed to be part of this show as well. So, gone on long enough. And I have some pieces right now in other shows. Ohio Designer Craftsman's Best of 2024 show that's going on through July 6th down at the Ohio Craft Museum. I'm a piece in that. And I'm also in The View, 30th annual jury landscape exhibition out at the Rosewood Art Center in Kettering, outside of Dayton. There's my site. And thank you again for having me here with you in this show. It has meant so much, and your work is just so incredible. And thank you all for listening. Enough, but are there any questions or about process? Yeah.
Yeah, did you study and know about woods before you carved, or in the process, or?
Oh, I for a long time, I was a scout growing up, so trees were a big thing for me then, and then also and I love to walk in nature. That's one of my one of the ways I take meditation, but also in my job in the hardware store, I've gotten to know them even more through that, because you're having to help people dealing with all sorts of different types of problems with all sorts of different types of trees, and you really have to get to know a lot of those trees. So I get to know them through working with them in my work, and reading about them and exploring them, digging through them, but also just through my interactions with people and through finding answers for people daily on what to do with their trees and what to do with their landscaping, because we answer a lot of really weird, unusual questions in visual hardware. That's sort of our job, and yes, it's been one of those unexpected benefits of the job that I just never could have foreseen.
Fascinating. Right.
Do you write?
I do, not as much as I used to. I was, because I came up in theater and film, I actually was a filmmaker for a long time and a screenwriter, and I used to teach screenwriting for CAPCO, actually, for the Contemporary American Theater Company. So I had taught for them for a number of years in both the screenwriting, playwriting, and then acting as well. Both Jeff and I taught for them for many years. I don't as much as I used to. I found that when I started working with wood, I became less verbal, and now being at the hardware store and you have to talk to people all day, I became less verbal again. But I'll probably find my way back to it some more at some point.